Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February NATS chat. I'm so happy to welcome Dr. Eric Hunter tonight to discuss Beyond Worn Out, Addressing Vocal Fatigue and Effort. Thank you, Dr. Hunter, for being here. And my co-host tonight is Ed Reisert. Thank you, Ed, for being here to help.
Kari, glad to be here.
So before I begin, I always want to start by thanking Inside View Press for their ongoing sponsorship of NATS Chats. We deeply appreciate that, so thank you. And as we begin tonight, I'll start by asking Dr. Hunter to share a little beyond the bio with us, something that helps us understand your love of voice and singing that has led you to the career you have.
No, sure. Thanks, Kari and Ed, again, Kari and Ed, for having me come. I know it's late for everybody, and it's a Friday, and and you're here with me, and that you're here at all that's flattering. And so I'm Eric Hunter. I'm the chair of the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at the University of Iowa. And kind of to answer Kari's question, I had been here once before when I did my PhD. And the story begins a little bit before that. I always liked music and always enjoyed it. I was in band in high school and choir. My mom made me play the piano and things like that. And I did marching band in college. And there was even a time I thought maybe I'd be a band teacher and I was going to do music. And but I always liked technology as well. And on the way between the two of those, I was doing some work and I ran into a guy and he said, well, do you know what? I asked him what he does and he says, I do acoustics. And pretty soon I'm like, well, that's like sound, right? And I ended up doing a little project with a professor. I was at Brigham Young University, and he was a big guy that did musical acoustics and speech acoustics. And I actually have a picture of him when we get to that. And that's where it all began. And he ended up he was 𝗚𝗂𝗲𝗀𝗃 PhD advisor. And so I just step in through that kind of way. So it was kind of a fun pathway.
I love that. What did you do in the marching band?
Oh, I played trumpet, and I was a total terror to everybody else. It was my stress release. I loved football games. I loved marching, and I know it gave me a reason to go.
Well, speaking of football, go Hawks! Sorry. This Sunday's Super Bowl, and of course, my Seattle is in the playoffs or in the final game, so we're excited around here. Well, would you like to share your presentation, and then Ed and I will have some questions, and we'll open it up for the audience as well.
You bet. All right. I hope you see something.
We do.
All right. So once again, it's good to be here with you, and thanks for letting me come. My area I study is really on voice production. I spent a lot of time the last bunch of years on paying attention to those that use their voice a lot. So people that like school teachers and singers that use their voice a lot. And really, when I think of what I'm excited about, what keeps me going, I think of these 3 T's: tools, technology, and teams. I like technology. I like the tools that go around science, and I like teams. The questions are really good and important, and some people I just can't stand I'm trying to understand things. I like it because it comes out of these other parts and trying to make it a useful difference. And then I briefly mentioned the 2 people I really stood on the shoulders on, Bill Strong and then 𝗚𝗂𝗲𝗀𝗃. And Bill was like working at Bell Labs when they were doing early speech stuff and early music things. So I modeled like clarinets with them and trombones and did all sorts of funny things back when, and he'd have these stories back when computers weren't as small as they are now. And then if I'm talking about teams, I also have to acknowledge my home team, which has been really good to me and taking care of me. And kind of a little bit more detail from Kari's question too. So I did my PhD here at the University of Iowa, and then I spent about 7 years in Denver, the Denver Center for the Performing Arts with the National Center for Voice and Speech. Taught a few classes at the Denver campus of of the University of Colorado, spent 4 years at the University of Utah, and then 10 years at the Michigan State University. So kind of going back and forth. And then about 2.5 years ago, I came back to Iowa, and I'm the department chair here. Incredible department, incredible voice resources. The people who are in the hospital are amazing. School of Music, David Myers at the School of Music. It's almost hard to keep up. It's just almost, I can't keep up most of the time. Well, now comes the boring part, and you wonder why you stay your Friday night like this. And kind of one of the strongest things when I'm not a singing teacher, I'm not a practitioner like that. And so I mean, I'm going to say a lot of things that probably just are already known and are part of what you are, but I try to imagine what some of the work we've done might fit. And really my thinking of probably the last year or two has really been on, as I went through science, you do these big things and large big data sets and averages and trying to describe things. And I've come all the way around like going, at the end of the day, it's all an individual. Averages are one thing, but what are you doing with the person in front of you trying to take care of things? And that's basically what you do in the studio. You're dealing with a person there. Even if you do small groups, it's all people, and it's a little bit different than how I came from. And but with that, I want to kind of touch on a couple of points as I look back at my research history on what and I misspelled journey. I see it right now. They know you're reading it, don't do it. I said now I'm like journey. Okay, there's no but you think of some of the different aspects I've kind of had to kind of walk through and kind of learned. I'm just going to kind of give some quick highlights. So rather than talking about the research techniques, organizing around these 5 ideas of first you have people different in capacity, whether it's lung function or how their bodies are organized, and then you have second you have how we adapt to things. And I'm going to mention some things about auditory feedback, string modulation, load and repertoire. Is something as well. We all have to deal with those in a very different way, in a unique way. How we deal with fatigue and recovery, that's just part of life, as well. Fatigue and we go through and we get recovery from things, and then kind of one of my thoughts of the last while is kind of the idea of effort and what our sense of effort into things and how it kind of unifies some of these understandings and the data we see. So, and apologize for my voice. This is my voice it is now. It was used not. I'll be like this and study this because part of it is I have the voice I have. So so starting at the most basic level, you have people. We differ in raw physiological capacity and breathing capacity, and we did a study in this when we published a while back. And so Len Maxfield is very well known here, and he was part of this. And we found that smaller capacity lungs, of course, equaled more fatigue. And if you imagine breath support, and you have to do a little bit more effort to make sure you're at the top of your breath cycle, and it may not be a big deal for somebody that's trained, but for people that are not trained, then it actually becomes an issue. And so from the purely physiological standpoint, there can be natural advantages to having larger lungs. Yes, you can spend more time vocalizing in the passive airflow region, and really you can do it with less work. And so that's just kind of one of those things we saw. Another one we saw, this is a paper we just published a bit ago. One of my PhD students was working with his friends down in Chile, and they had people go through a bunch of different posturings. We talk a lot about posturing and vocalization. And one of the interesting things we saw here is that the changes in different posturing types did alter muscle activity patterns and how people use their airflow, but it really didn't change the output much. It did change the effort that was involved in the different places, but people could really adjust to it. And so, you have effort was required to produce that sound, but really you couldn't tell hearing, and we couldn't measure any differences. And so it's just, posturing is a big part of what we talk about. And here's one this is an old one, 2014. We're looking at laryngeal tissues directly. And I purposely don't show those pictures this evening, and you don't want to see pictures like that. And we found something really kind of fascinating as we were studying how we could stretch muscles and create strain. And you imagine, how you change pitch or something like that. And what we found that was interesting is if you modulated the stretch, you could actually maintain tension longer. And all of a sudden you go, boy, that's a really interesting thing. If you think of vibrato, and this is a leap into that. I'm not saying that vibrato exists to necessarily support higher notes. So I don't know that exactly, but it's a useful analogy that stretched tissue always relaxes. You stretch your muscles and you hold it out and they will relax. If you modulate it, it maintains the stretch longer and that stiffness longer. And that's why it's hard to stand perfectly still, but you wobble a little bit and it's easier to stand there. And I can't imagine that vibrato isn't also a helpful thing in that as you're holding
Interesting.
a good note. No, it's just speculation, but it just is an interesting kind of thing we found. Another one we did, honestly, a good friend, he is a trained Italian singer. Some of you know of 𝗚cie-𝗀𝗶𝗰. He's at the University of Illinois. That also does acoustics, and we did these studies with a series of naive and some more trained singers and had them sing with different degrees of feedback to the point that sometimes we were totally masking what they would hear. We're blasting their ears with noise and everything else. And in these studies, just changing what they heard also changed how they sang. And that isn't surprising. Like I said, most of the stuff, you're going to go, yeah, sure, we kind of already know this. That's what most research does, is just affirm what we kind of already know. The pitch accuracy, the loudness, the vocal quality all shifted, primarily in those that had less long-term experience. And so you think of the motor learning that can kind of happen, and also the effort that it would take to be in those things. So the training kind of helps stabilize the response regardless of what was happening to what we were blasting in their ears, even though the voice still was hard for them not to adapt to what they thought it was required. And getting, you think in the pedagogical sense, why getting technique into the motor memory matters then so much as you then go into whatever environment you might need to be in and performing in. Here's another one this is one Ingo and I did a long time ago, just looking at some untrained and trained singers, and this is kind of hard to see. But we're looking at the hearing range, and that's what this kind of checkered mark shape is what our ears are sensitive to. And then what we call the voice range profile, and then also kind of where the overall effort of singers were. And we found that like trained singers, first they use more of the hearing range generally. They fill in the capacity, the more trained they were. And so that's a big deal. And another part of it is, and whether it's, you call it the ring, the belt, the singer's format, lines up not only in a nice place, but it lines up right when the ear is most sensitive. And that was kind of a thing. And it just, the untrained didn't, even though the untrained had larger areas of the voice range profile. That was kind of a fun effect. And turning like the singing efficiency and how well the ear and the voice are tied together. Here's one to do with actually Lynn Maxwell and Matt Sloniger, and looking at tessitura and how they would kind of map on singers' sense of ease and matching, essentially their as they try to match where they would be, picking a song that would match. And we saw a couple of interesting things in this one, on what their sense of ease was when it would be a good match with what they could do. But it also, like, where it was. It wasn't that a singer couldn't do this area, a part of their voice, their singing range, but there are places, of course, you can imagine it's easier to spend your time in. And what was even more fascinating is this kind of blue line, this area, you might see this, is where the singer kind of had their voice range profile. These other ones are certain areas, and they're the singing profiles of a song. And this one particular singer could totally go outside of what we could try to coach them when it came to the voice range profile. But once they were in the mode of singing, there's just a little bit extra gear that would sometimes stick in, which was kind of fun. And a kind of a different follow-up one, well, it's actually a precursor one that Matt also and I worked on, is looking at the sense of what happened outside the studio and outside of the rehearsal, and how much effect it had on the rehearsal. And of course, I think that's another was we know that. But what we saw is that some saw their vocal load was highly uneven, and one of them was even having a lot because they were in a choir, and one of them was a college student that was in band too. And so they were getting all this extra work that was affecting their singing that was going on, and how people kind of carry the load as what goes on. You might get somebody, a student or whoever in your studio, and you actually don't know what load they've had all day that they might not even be aware of. A fun one just that is coming, I put this slide up here, is we just did one, and this is over a week of rehearsals getting ready for a performance, and we tracked how this very proficient singer, their voice was changing the entire time as they were getting ready to. But then we saw some of the metrics where you see that he wasn't aware of it, but he started taking a couple of days, almost light days, right before the last day. It was kind of interesting. We're like, "What did you do here?" And he goes, "I don't know." It was kind of fun. So watch for that paper. It's drafting that up somewhere. And another one, when now getting towards fatigue a little bit, is fatigue itself. We experience fatigue in a lot of different ways, and fatigue has been a hard one to try to define and get to, but this comes from an early study we did. We did a couple in a row. But part of it is it's hard to know when it's showing up and why it's showing up. It can be influenced by a lot of different factors. Like we saw one of the studies we did, we showed that somebody would go through a large vocalization task, and they'd be tired then, and then it would show up really the next day is when it would really hit them. And we kind of made the analogy of you go and work out, you're fatigued, and you kind of recover through the day, but you're not sore until the next day. And so we went through, and this lower paper here, this 100 one from 2009, as we looked at different ways that things damage and recover, and the time frame, and that some, and the study we did with school teachers, some of them would take them about a day to recover, some of them would take 3 days, and depending on that physiological mechanism, they kind of needed to know that, because you need to have a gauge, am I have enough recovery time? And in the case of the school teachers, the weekend wasn't enough. But we also did it with Tom Carroll and John Nix and a bunch of them. We did it on some singing singers, and leading up to a major event. And so when they're in the big dress rehearsals, and then a performance, and also looked at theirs, and up and through the event, they'd say, okay, I'm feeling a little fatigued. It was often later in the evening when they're done, or the next day. And so really, I think that's probably what our the story here is it's almost a lot like hydration. It's not what you drink today, it's what you've already drunk. And the fatigue is kind of the same thing. Yeah, you're going to experience something today, but really, what was yesterday like? And where were you? And and that kind of work. Vocal effort. As I lead a little bit to vocal effort. So if we had fatigue, we experienced fatigue, but where I've spent my head a little bit for the last while is what is the effort it takes to do something as a measure of how I can perform or do a task. Um, and and why effort has been something that I've had to kind of be drug into, as I used to say, well, let's just measure something. Turns out our measurements weren't making any sense. And so like that was one of the studies that here is we had somebody do the same task for weeks, multiple times a day. And I'm just showing you one data set, and they're all about the same. You might have heard of the spectral peak prominence. It's a measure that kind of quantifies it generally and associates with voice quality a little bit. After this warm-up task that this guy did over and over and over and over again, most of the time the voice was better. Not all the time. Most of the time, that's what that line is. So most of the time it was positive, not all the time, because you have to take into account effort and then what else has been going on. And so sometimes the warm-ups don't tell all the story. It can help normalize, but you never know what else has been going on in the life. Another thing we also saw with warm-ups is that sometimes the short-term warm-ups effect actually would result in an increase of effort. And you're like, oh, wait a minute, the warm-up should help me do more. But all we could try to interpret was sometimes first we don't know what was going on before they came in. And sometimes you become more attuned and aware. We'll see that sometimes in the clinical population too. As people come in with a certain voice, they're clearly better. You can hear it better. You can show that it's better. And they feel that it's worse because now they're attuned to it. And they're like, now they're more sensitive to it. And so the feeling is actually kind of an important and being aware to it. So that's an interesting kind of sense of warm up. Okay, last one. All right. And then I may not be able to answer questions, but we can at least talk. When I tried thinking of, and this is just kind of my take-home slide here. When you try to do the research, you try to look for big numbers. We try to do averages, how tall people are, how big they are, whatever it is. At the end of the day, none of us are in that specific thing. We're a point and trying to understand the individual. And one of the trickiest thing in all these things, and why I think when you think of you work with whoever you work with in studio or on stage, is it doesn't matter your memory or your understanding of things, that person is dealing with their individual set of things, set of circumstances, set of physiology. We're all different, a little bit different in capacity and limits. We all adapt slightly differently. Some of that can be from our experiences and our understanding and our training. Load and how we experience the load of things and the demand of things can be hard. And where I think a lot of this can be done is by, if you look at the whole self of what's going on in the production and the work and the effort and what people sense, then it can make a little bit more sense. There's the ease and the effort of it. So it isn't that we're trying to eliminate anything. It's trying to interpret and trying to understand the point of the level. And you've all seen that. You have two singers, and we'd see this in the lab, sing the same phrase beautifully, and yet that have very different experiences doing that task. For a variety of reason. And so really effort, I think, is that final signal to help us kind of tease it together between what are they experiencing until fatigue appears. Because once it appears, we're starting to get a little bit too close to being too far down the road, where I'd rather be sensing my effort just went up when it shouldn't have. So,
Mm-hmm.
all right,
Mm-hmm.
just for fun, Dave Meyer and I have been playing around the last couple of years, and we're going to do it again. We looked at when the football schedule was clean in Iowa City. So if you want to come and see us, we don't have an advertise this anywhere. So you're the first group to know.
Wow.
We picked the day of November 7th, and so you can come and visit us in Iowa City, and we'll have fun. But anyway, I have to thank a whole bunch of people that have been part of what I do. All
That's
right.
great to hear. Oh, that was, gosh, there were so many nuggets in there. I especially appreciated all the italics and quotes. For example, stability often comes from movement, not stillness. That really resonated with me. And if people have different respiratory capacities, then the same vocal task is simply not the same load. Yeah, there was, I bet, Ed as well. Before I turn it over to Ed, I want to ask one question. In the studio, and especially in the capacity of mentoring in the rehabilitative frame, I often talk about defining fatigue. So a client comes in and said, I had a gig last night, I had a lot of voice fatigue. I teach to be very careful that we don't put our bias of what fatigue means, what our sensations of fatigue are, because I've learned over the years, I immediately think, oh, my throat, I empathize. And yet when I have a conversation with them, they actually didn't have physical sensations. Their voice maybe just sounded more muted or fuzzy or tired, or so. All that preamble to ask you, Dr. Hunter, as a researcher, how do you define fatigue?
Oh, that's a brutally hard question. In fact, I used to, so I've been publishing papers and doing work in this for, I don't know, a good 15 or more years. And fatigue, I'd always throw it around very much early. And fatigue, we're going to do fatigue, until I realized we're it's not fatigue. And I think, Kari, you just said it really well. What do people think? Is it cognitive? Is it more of the baggage I've just been carrying because life is hard today, and I can't distinguish the difference very well? And so what we finally gone to is like going, well, let's go towards fatigue, but let's get some things we can define a little bit more. And those are things like, what are the demands of the situation? How are you fulfilling the demands of them? You have an environment, you got to sing it. I can describe that environment, I can try to fill it, and then how much effort does it take? And looking at like that, and then fatigue, then we've started to find is more as a change, when our change in capacity, when we can't quite do it the same way, then it's fatigue. I can sense a lot of things, but more trying to define it as I'm not as capable to do it as I just was. And so once again, using like an exercise analogy, the exercise science people, they'll look at when you get muscle fatigue as when you can't maintain something or you can't keep up with something. So when you can't keep up, you're trying to do something with a cadence. And at some point, you just can't quite get it the same way as you could a bit ago. It's a change of capacity to a demand, to a load. And now there are two types of fatigue in that world too, is they call one state fatigue and one trait fatigue. And
Okay.
and the trait fatigue is kind of the one that can recover quickly. And so when somebody walks into your studio, they have a current state fatigue at that point that's accumulative of their sleep they've been having, their general overall physical health, whatever. It's this long-term, slowly changing. There's a state of fatigue. The trait of fatigue is what they'll experience in the midst of a rehearsal. And so then they have this trait. And that's the one that can kind of recover. And so it's like trying to get a sense of, well, what is it? What's the state of things when they walk in? And then what's the trait that can kind of vary on it? I think so it's important to kind of get a sense of those and then all the factors to it. I mean, the psychological effort of it, cognitive effort, because some people feel more fatigued because also you just threw them down a score that they're going, wait a minute, and all of a sudden it's in a language they're not quite as familiar with as the other one, and all that stuff eases into them, and it's hard to just and distinguish out where's my effort and fatigue coming from. And it may be cognitive, it may be lower back pain. It's just kind of projecting. It's just really difficult.
But mostly, in all of that, I didn't hear you talk about a sense of physical discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
so for me, that's when people are sent to me by the medical team and they are using that language, I immediately assume physical discomfort, and that isn't always the case, and which is what led me. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a study we did with a bunch of school teachers where we would have them every 2 hours over the course of a couple of weeks that rate their effort, their pain, and their discomfort, and then they do this little task. And I really like the concept of this task. It's something some of you could have your singers do. Is called the inability to produce soft voice. It comes from an ENT in Chicago, and all it was this little high-pitched little task that's soft and high-pitched you do, and you just count your inability to do that. And because I would, when I do it, it's like after lunch, my reflex is a little bit higher. I couldn't do it as well. It'd be okay like 2 hours later. And so some little tasks like that you can kind of get a sense of what's the fatigue I'm feeling, the pain I'm feeling, and what's my ability to do something that indicates like a physiological fatigue. And so I think as you work with your students and your patients and as a practitioner, is trying to help people identify the different ones. Like you're saying, is it a sense here? Where is it coming from? Because it's hard to tell, and they do bleed.
The checking the mucosal ceiling, right? Yeah. So I love this, and I'm actually going to put you both on the spot. I think that's where I'm going to go because I have a couple questions. So when you were measuring the vocal load of these students, there wasn't a sense of really tracking what they're doing from the time that they stopped singing day 1 to the time that they're tested day 2. So when I think of, Kari, your work with vocal cooldowns, was there any sort of awareness of what behaviors they were showing to actually just anticipate that there might be some fatigue the next day?
Go ahead, Dr. Hunter.
No, you have an idea. I think what comes to mind is, and I'm not even sure really, but I think that's an experience thing. When we're all younger, it's hard for us to think of the next day and the cost of our daily work on the next day. And I think with experience, we start to remember, that fatigues me or that impacts me, and I need to make sure I do cool down. I remember being a teenager and just being able to get up, go out of bed, and I'd go run for a couple miles, and not realizing, this is a bad thing to do. I need to warm up. I need to stretch. I need to cool down. And that comes with experience enough, and the experience that wasn't pleasant. So I don't know, Kari, what?
Ed, are you thinking that they might be psychologically anticipating? Is that what, from a heavier rehearsal?
So I think of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So in the way that we work with the students who are singing, what are they doing to actually anticipate, okay, this is going to be a task that has a really high load to it. I better provision for some additional tasks that allow for some sort of cool down, recalibration, the next day that I mitigate the problem.
So I can answer it this way from my 2 little studies compared to the 5,000 that Eric has done, right? But what I do know from that was that the statistician said, there is no statistical significance, right, to report, but the singers self-reported significant vocal comfort, emotional comfort when they did the cool down. That significantly impacted how they felt about their voice, both after the heavy voice dose and the next day. So yeah.
So
I'm not
could
sure.
that be connected to state fatigue rather than trait fatigue?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder.
It's interesting.
And Kari, you mentioned that there were these little tidbits, and I'd like to go back to a tidbit that I'd like you to go into in more depth, Dr. Hunter. You're talking about the sweet spot in the ear.
Mm-hmm.
That was
describe that in greater detail, and
yeah,
from the lens of what could we do as instructors to help engage that part of our training and that part of our ability?
well, that's a good question. Now, eliciting it from your students and stuff. That's, I don't know how you do that, but I can tell you a little bit about where it comes from and why it might be fun. So, however the system's developed, the ear, and you think of the floppy part we all have, the pin out there, and then it goes into the ear canal, and everything that your Q-tip touches, but the doctors say you're not supposed to. You have this tube that's it's just like 1.5 centimeters long. And if you think of tubes, and if you think back where resonances come from, there's a resonance that comes from that. There's some other resonances that come from the ear. But that tube makes a really interesting place where sound that would fit in that wavelength will resonate well, and our ears are very sensitive. That is nearly identically the same length if you make an epilaryngeal tube. This part of the ring and the belt, it's about the same length. And so you have these two tubes, one creating sound and resonance or resonating, and the other one sensitive to it. And I think it's just a really interesting thing that our ear has this huge range of ability that it's sensitive to, that's good for our environment. You hear the low growl from the tiger in the zoo, and there's something primal in the back of your neck that says this is not a good thing. But that part our ear is sensitive to, we have the ring, fits in the throat, and where our vowel identifications are. So when you think when you're doing your modifications, your mouth, those all line up within the same breadth of the hearing sensitive things. So one thing you can tell your students is like you work on that area, even though people can hear the other stuff too, that's the one they're going to feel more, and they won't know why, because that's where it's most sensitive. And that's the one that's going to give them the chills, and they're going to go, oh, that was neat, because you linked those two little oscillators together. And that's a neat thing. I don't know if that helps you get it out of them, but it's kind of fun.
Amazing.
I want to just remind everyone to please use the question box and drop your questions in there, and Ed and I will ask them on your behalf. So we welcome those questions. I have one. How do you define vocal effort in a way singers can actually track without spiraling into overthinking or body monitoring?
Oh, oh boy.
These figures are complicated, Eric.
That's a complicated, the way we specifically define effort in our research study is we tie it to a task. And that way it starts pulling it away from me of what I'm sensing about. It's like, how hard was it to do that task? Therefore, it's not me, it's a task. And so we try to do that so we can quantify it better, but that might help a little bit that body shaming or whatever else they start feeling about, because then that you can change that task, or you can ramp up to that task, or you can do something to be more ready for the task. It's a difficulty of doing a task. And what's difficult when we think of vocal effort generally, and it's happened in our field, is we've kind of grouped it all together. We hear vocal effort, we do you vocal effort? And so what we defined it as is, it's only when it's done on a task. It's not the effort I feel generally on this task. And therefore, when you hear it in somebody else, you call that, I'm hearing strain or high effort, but I'm hearing effort, but I'm not feeling effort. And so try to put that as vocal effort is what you feel on a task. It's the internal cost of a signal in a science firm, like the cost to do it. And that can change over the course of the day. It's going to be different in the morning and the evening.
Mm-hmm.
And so that way you can say effort will change. It's not you specifically, it's the task, and that can change. I don't know if that helps. But
No,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
The other part that kind of goes with it, and this is me just being a professor and talking more than your question allowed, but it's also by putting to a task, then it's like, well, then you can define the task. And the task is a load. It's a demand of the situation, and that can be defined. You have to sing in a space. You have to, what kind of space do we have? Close mic support. I'm here with a mic purposely because of that, because I do better if I have a mic like this and I actually have good feedback, a side tone on it. And some of you, when you sing, you'll do that. You have you're routing it to in your earbuds or whatever you're doing. It keeps me more moderated. So that's my environment I'm singing to. I can define it. I try to perform into it, and I can keep my effort to something that's reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Ed, we lost your sound.
No, we didn't. I did oh, forgot to unmute, sorry. The questions are starting to come in, so thank you for the questions. And we have one from Isabel, and it's, could you speak on specific ways to prevent vocal fatigue? So people are all looking for practical.
Yeah. That's, well, is the general one is like going, well, are you drinking enough water? Are you doing your warm-ups? There's those kinds of things. So I think there's the multiple aspects of, you're going to be, a task can be fatiguing as you dive into it, and you have, and that is both your effort into it and the duration of it. The longer the duration, of course, you're going to have more fatigue that goes into it. And then what do you bring to it? The more you're ready for it, the more you're hydrated, the more you're in shape, the more you're warmed up, the more you're tuned into it, then you might be able to mitigate it. And the best way to avoid the effort is identifying when it's getting close to that and you need to start pulling back. Just avoiding some things, taking some little breaks. If you're in a choir, there's times when you just mouth it, and that's it. And one of the things that we used to do it when I do the trumpet, but I've heard some singers doing it, and some of you probably do, and you'll say, oh, I do it all the time, is, at the beginning of a new score or a new piece, you don't actually do it, you do some of it. And I've seen some take the straw and they're just humming it, and they just to kind of get the cadence of it and the general pitch of it, and you can still do some lungs with it because you can push the lungs, and it keeps the load off the vocal folds.
Mm-hmm.
And so you do things to kind of go through the motions that still starting to get in your head, but keep the load down and that demand down off the vocal folds. And so buying yourself some time with it.
Really teaching autonomy, isn't it, to our for voice teachers, and teaching singers of all ages, but especially young singers, to trust their own internal perception of what's going on and when to say, I need to not sing in this rehearsal.
Oh, that's it. That is so hard because we're in it, and we're in the moment of things. It overrides some of those sensations in a good way. Sometimes there's times when we do want to perform, and you know what? It's worth it. We're just gonna blow through it. There are times for it because and so it's not a bad feature when it's modulated and controlled and aware of. And so it's really trying to become aware of those senses in our body. And that's really hard to learn. And we all sense a little different.
Having had my feet in both public school teaching, choral music, to also just give the students permission, yes, you can drop out once in a while if you see that unfortunately comes from the top, just to remind the students that they have and the musicians and singers to drop out if they need to, that they have to be, and they're, as you said, Kari, have the autonomy to control their own systems. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We have another question about how to specific behaviors that might help kickstart recovery. They point out that athletes will jump in an ice bath and take post-workout supplements. And are there routines that would prompt for singers' recovery? You know, during the cool down study, I really wanted to do some kind of dry ice. I wanted to see if, you know, because sometimes when you sing, you think, I just want some ice cream now to cool the system down. So I really thought, I talked to John Nix about it at the time. Can we devise some kind of, you know, something that ice would have an impact, but it was one too many elements to try and measure. But anyway, what thoughts do you have about?
Yeah, I mean, this is all speculation as we try to bring in things from other fields. Anytime there's inflammation, the ice helps. Like, you know, if you get to the point of you have real focal fatigue, there's probably some inflammation that's going on. But you can't do anything about that. You can't drop dry ice down there. Hydration and a more humid environment does seem to help, even if it's more of the sense of it being helpful, because we're not as aware enough and we can calm down, relax, because there's things happen. Our neck and our vocal folds are right in the middle of a whole bunch of real estate. Everything kind of constricts there. So everything we feel can also go there. So just the overall trying to relax, and if the humidifier helps do that, even if it doesn't during the vocal folds, it will then helping. So how do you just kind of go through relaxing? Some things that, and one of the studies I kind of mentioned might fit there, but there's been some study on using one of the vocal therapies that's a resonance voice therapy post-surgery. And so now we're going to something extreme. They've actually done some surgery to the vocal folds, and they found that the healing happens better if people aren't on full voice rest, like completely, but they have some very light vocalization. And so I think of that when I was talking about the stretching of the vocal folds and maintaining. Is there something about at least a little bit of movement? It needs to be light movement. It can't be more damaging. But you know, when you're fatigued, there's where your cool down is. But kind of keep it there. Where's your light voice? Where's your, you know, and getting a little bit of stretching there, because the other thing that can happen in muscles generally, and this example comes from like bicyclists, like the Olympic bicyclists, is they need to run blood through their muscles, yet their muscles and their legs are so tight, the heart can't pump the blood. The blood pumps through the muscles in the leg because the cycles of the legs in their cycling. It's the constriction and stuff. And so some light vocalization, I think, can probably help. And then some just normal things. You get your pitch glides, and they're really light ones, not big ones, but just get some things moving lightly. I think can let the fluids flow. It can maybe let the blood get in there and remove things. This is all speculation. It makes sense to me that those things happen because of other things in the body. But back off a little bit of vocalization, move it around a little bit, you know, so.
Well, and of course, Marco Guzman's research on the water bubbles and actual tissue vibrating the tissue as a way of giving a laryngeal massage effect. It has to be a big tube. It has to be a 1 centimeter or 10 to 15 millimeter tube in order to get those benefits.
I love those water bubbles things. It feels good. Like I said, and I don't know if it physiologically changes things, even it might be just psychological, but regardless, I feel better when I do it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So we have another question from Lizzie. Given that we know that belt singing presents with higher subglottal pressure than the other types of singing, what do you think about the threshold of perceived effort that is vocally sustainable, but also creates an exciting, likable belt that we hear?
Boy, this is
Is more effort perception absolutely necessary to be successful?
Well, that's a trap waiting to happen, because I know there's lots of discussions between those things. There's a lot, I mean, in any kind of performance of any kind, there's a lot that can be done with technique, and you all know that. And there's also a lot that can be done that is a little bit individual. There's some people that same technique, there's just some things they can do and other things they can't, or everybody's shifted just by a couple of semitones, and so it just doesn't line up. But you know, high effort over time is not a good state to be in. We all can do it, but you don't want to stay in a state of high effort long term. That is not a healthy place to be. It's just not, regardless of what it is. And so if something is high effort all the time, you got to change something, whatever that is. It's a technique, it's this, whatever it is. You don't want to stay in a high effort place long term. It's going to get you. That's the one thing I can say.
Good. Ed, do you want to do another, or want to do the next one? How about from Sarah? Okay. Is your effort always measured in the perception of the performer, or are there other metrics you use? I'll let you.
It's mostly in the person's effort. Now, there's ways we try to quantify it, because it'd be nice to know how much somebody is providing effort, because people are sensitive to different things. You can have some people, you can give two people a pain scale, and you know, and they're going to rate it very differently depending on you know, they have thresholds, and so it is a perceptual measure, and it is there's psychological profiles that will vary all of that, and that's beyond my scope of knowledge. The one we do is finding something that works, and there's a couple out there. What we use in our research is one called the Borg scale, and it's a psychometric scale. And they use it in all sorts of situations when it comes to performance and exercise and stuff. But it's a little bit cumbersome to use on a daily basis, but there are some other ones out there. I know there's a senior ease scale, and there's one published for the clinic that isn't psychometrically true like this Borg scale, but it's still useful. But having something, especially if you're in a studio and you have students, having this scale, and it can just be like a pain scale, 0 to 10, you know, as something that they can start thinking of, because part of it is the performance of going through and thinking, how hard was that to do? And kind of tracking it and trying to get it regulated in your head will help, because then you can kind of get a sense of, oh, that is hard. What am I doing differently? What can I change here? If that's, because I don't want to stay in that high effort place long unless I'm purposely doing it, you know. So and so having but it's usually a scale of some sort, and but we like the Borg scale. If you look Borg scale, there's a researcher named Eva van Leer and Marion van Mersberg, and we've used their scale for a while, and we've changed that, and it's in a paper. It's like a 10-point Borg scale, and you can kind of mark, and it has little marks on it what things mean. But there's easier ones out there that are probably just as useful.
Excellent. Dr. Hunter, another question. I would love to hear more about the methodology behind the study on modulation of tension, distributing load on muscle tissue. Can you talk a little bit about how you set that up?
Right. Okay. So this was not in real live tissue. I'll say that right now. This is in dead tissue, and this is how we were. I started my career modeling the vocal folds and measuring the stresses of it and the different things, and then trying to model it. And so what we'd do is we'd take a little vocal fold, little muscles from the legs. I mean, these little size of your thumb, thumbnail, and we'd stretch them. And when you stretch them, of course, it's like a rubber band. You stretch it, gets tighter and tighter, and that's what and we would get the stresses of it. But muscle and tissue generally is an interesting thing. What the stress that comes out, and stress is how much force it pulls back on it when you pull it, stretch it. So the stress when you pull it up goes up, and it actually is nonlinear. So at some point, you're not pulling very much, and it gets higher and higher tension on it. And when you relax that, it actually goes below the curve than before. And I want you to think about if you're stretching your arm or your leg muscle, and then all of a sudden you relax it, you can imagine it being a little bit more floppy than it was on the way out. And that's kind of what it is it's tighter on the way up, and it's actually lower on the way down. And it's a funny thing, and we would model it, and I knew it was there. We modeled it, we put it in my models, and then one day I'm like going, well, that's a nonlinear system, and nonlinear systems do weird things. That means if I do it regularly, I'm not going to get something that I think is normal. And we tested on the tissue, and we tested the model, and sure enough, if you wanted to have a certain tension on it, if you just stretched it, it'd start immediately relaxing. But if I stretched it and then I modulated it, it would still relax, but not as fast. And that relaxation, if we think of in tissue of the vocal folds, you get a note, you're holding that note. It takes more and more effort to hold that for a whole bunch of reasons. One of them is you're holding that muscle, it's going to start relaxing. That tissue is going to start relaxing as soon as you're there. One way you can maintain that is just modulate it a little bit, stretch it a little bit further, relax it, which is what we do with vibrato. So, and so putting that into your thing, and you do it all the time. With your pitches and everything else, you do all sorts of things. You do your lungs, you do your effort of your passagios and everything else. A lot of these things, they're movement, and it isn't just. And part of it's to warm up because you're trying to get your precision down, but part of it is also it's just healthier. It's easy. It's stable systems are moving systems, and which is kind of a funny thing.
That's great. Ed, do you have any questions from your? I know you had a list as we get close to the top of the hour.
Well, I saw one that sort of matched, just to get back on sort of on topic in terms of why people might have come here. So what do you do with the student who wants to soldier on?
There's this wonderful researcher from Sweden, Susan Whitling, and she calls it grit. And she says some people just have grit. And the problem is that can be a feature, and most features in all of us also have a liability to them. And there are times when it's useful to soldier on, and there's other times you just say, no, you don't want to, because you're ignoring signals of pain. And Kari, you mentioned the Super Bowl. This is one of those times those guys need to soldier on. When they're tape it up, get back in there, because this is a once in a lifetime thing. There are times you do it, but there's going to be a cost to it.
Yeah.
And so you got to teach your students like going, you can soldier on. You don't get to do that all the time, and it will cost you. So you got to make sure you're spending it on the right things at the right times, is what I like to think. It's not avoiding it, it's being wise with it.
I keep thinking of Lindsey Vonn this weekend, who of course got injured again, and everyone knows that story, and we'll see. She's gonna soldier on, and it'll be interesting to see the cost. On the other side.
There will be a cost, and
there will be a cost. That's an interesting framing of that. I appreciate that.
To train so many years for this one moment.
Yeah,
I
get it.
Yeah. So Eric, I'm so sorry. Please.
Please.
I was just gonna say, from all your years of study, are there any takeaways or grand themes that you think of that voice teachers really need to know as a preeminent takeaway for us, besides all the wonderful nuggets you've already shared?
Oh, that's one of the things like going, you all know more than me. I would actually say that what's interesting is all the nuggets. Most of them were nuggets, not because you didn't know them, but they affirmed something you kind of knew, but you didn't know it. or you kind of knew it and you were like going, that just affirmed what I thought. And so one thing is if you have a sense for something, it's probably real. So let it, trust it. If you have a sense for something that you've been doing, you're like going, that just doesn't seem right, or that actually does seem right. You're a practitioner. You're an expert. Have confidence in running with it, because all this research is truly just more affirmational than it is than anything else. And you may not have the experience yet that you've experienced something, and so that's where we learn from research or from somebody else. But I don't know if I have anything that you all don't kind of just already know.
Well, I hope people rewatch that presentation, because like I said, the quotes in italics, every slide had this extraordinary nugget of a takeaway for us. So it's always wonderful to speak to a researcher who can speak at the voice teacher level, who can take that wealth of knowledge and the way that your brain works that is so different than my brain. So I'm always grateful to talk to you, Eric. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
If we want to find your research, where would we find it?
Oh, don't. Unless you have insomnia and you're trying to sleep. If you Google Eric Hunter, Iowa, it should go to my page. And if you really want to, there's a link, and it'll take you to a thing called PubMed, or another one called OrcID, ORCID, and it just lists all the horrible, gory piles.
How many are you at?
Papers. I don't
How
even.
many?
We're 100 and something papers. It just. I still remember the first one and how hard that was, and now I can't keep up, and so it's just.
God bless you for all that. I mean that genuinely, because I just did the two that were all in the same thing. Never again.
But that's what another thing I have to think of. There's a couple of these papers I was presenting today that I hadn't thought about for a while. I'm thinking of this event. I went back and said, okay, what can I pull in there? Like, well, this was really fun. And it wasn't just what we learned. I was thinking of the people. I'm like, oh yeah, I did that with Kate Emmerich. I remember doing that. And it was like a good memory. So me just preparing for this was fun.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And Ed, again, thank you for helping me navigate this tonight. I'm deeply indebted for your willingness and your efforts. The next NATS chat will be March 8th, and another topic that I love called pain reprocessing therapy. It's such an important topic to me, and we will have Paulina Sobel, and Torin Kitts, both of whom are PRT therapists, and bringing this idea of pain reprocessing therapy into the voice community is a great passion of mine, because I'm seeing it help so many people. So I hope you'll join us then. Everyone else, be safe and well until then, and I'll see you in March. Thank you again. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.